We're continuing our hometown conversations this week with a stop by the Chippewa Valley LGBTQ+ Community Center. Center's board president says they've seen exponential growth over the past few years, which she says is reflective of the desire and need for the services they provide, like transgender and teenage support groups for residents looking for a shoulder to lean on. But she also says that the work is, of course, far from over, and even with recent progressions toward equity and equality, rights for those she says are simply not conforming to social norms are still very limited. Talking a little bit about same-sex marriage, it has been 5 years this year since it was legalized here in the United States. Can we talk a little bit about, how important that was?
Obviously, yeah, it was historic, same-sex marriage being legalized. It was one of those things where it really showed all this hard work and build up to achieve it. However, there's so much more work to do. We have seen that there's been no negative consequences of it, so like all the naysayers literally were wrong. But there's so much work to do. Right now we are really focusing on transgender rights. Right now, particularly in the state of Wisconsin, gender identity and expression is not a protected class. Only sexual orientation is. Transgender people are not protected. In many states, I think it's only maybe even less than 10 states where they are. So that means that they can be discriminated against in housing, adoption, no longer workplace, education, and medical. So transgender people and gender identity and expression can no longer be discriminated in the workplace. Like I said earlier, the state of Wisconsin did not have workplace protections for gender identity and expression. Many people would be like, well, gender is a protected class. But people need to understand that your idea, society's idea of gender is not gender identity and expression. People do not have to identify as male or female, which is what's protected. I personally think this is more historical than the legalization of gay marriage because right now so many trans people are being attacked that making this like the Supreme Court making this bold statement is kind of showing where we can go for equal rights for all LGBTQ people. Gender is definitely created by society, so I think that it's important to understand that when you speak to like transgender individuals, it's just that they are breaking societal norms, and I think that's why it's a little scary for most people, but like there's no actual scientific proof or necessity to have to be masculine just because you were born a male or feminine because you're born. So I think, and non-binary folks are really balance that line, and I think it's something like as society that we need to work on and understand that gender is not a straight, hard, forward thing. So
when it comes to trans people in the media, how are they portrayed?
Back in the early 2000s and 90s, like they were often portrayed as a joke. You've seen them in movies where it was men dressed as women to try to get away with something, to infiltrate. You've seen that. Transgender people in the media is oftentimes misrepresented and misunderstood as they're portraying a woman, I guess you should say, without like feeling it, that they can turn it on and off. And it's just like, it's not real. So when cisgender people play transgender characters, it's almost given the perception that anybody can be transgender. You just have to dress like a woman or dress like a man that day. Transgender people are not just dressing up that day. They're not just pretending to be a woman that day and then going home. Like, they are women.
When it comes to the notion of, one person expecting something from someone else just based on the way they were born, what do you think that kind of stems from? Why are some people so hard pressed to say that this person is this gender because that's what they were assigned at birth?
I think it's because as a society we have pushed this binary concept of male and female for centuries. It's always been that way. Men have always tried to have an upper hand. Toxic masculinity plays into it as well. It's what we've created as a society, and any change is, people don't welcome change, people don't understand change, and oftentimes when people don't understand something, it makes them angry, confused, and unwilling to learn because they don't get why they should.
So in Illinois, they had just passed a law that will make education on LGBTQ history mandatory in public schools. What are your thoughts on that?
They need to know the struggles and the history behind predominant, so like they need to know about the Stonewall riots and why that was important for the gay rights movement. They need to understand the fight for equality up until gay marriage was allowed. They need to understand the Equality Act. They need to understand the suppression and the struggles that LGBTQ people have faced, so that we don't, one, make those mistakes again, but also so that they feel like they are valid and like they are not. If you don't see yourself in the history books, then you're not going to see yourself as actually mattering or existing.
How can people who don't identify within the community be actual allies? How can they help?
To be an ally, it is to stand up for us, to show up for us, and to be there for us in the good and the bad. You have to also understand the different aspects of being a part of the LGBTQ community, what that means, and you also have to understand intersectionality amongst them. LGBTQ people are in all walks of life. They're in all races, they're in all religions, they're in all communities, they're in all parts of the country, they're in all jobs. You have to be an ally for people of color, for low income, for the homeless. To be an ally, it just means that you have to take in consideration that this is a very broad community.
So when it comes to solutions at the local level, state, federal, talk to me about the importance of having representation there.
LGBTQ and marginalized representation is minimal across all local, state, national. We have an issue with bringing other voices to the table. I don't think that marginalized communities are voiceless. I think they're just suppressed and they're not being brought. So I think that it's important for people to understand that the people who have the solutions are the people that are facing the problems. I would never expect somebody else to solve my issues if they don't know my issues.